than the person sitting next to you in the pew. Somebody with dark skin she talked to said, "You have no idea how people don't think twice about using dark as shorthand for tragic or dirty or foul." Somebody from northern Canada tells her how precious darkness is in the midsummer because the sun never really goes down. Susan Stopcotty, one of our office staff, has a daughter who lives in Alaska. In the summertime, it's never dark. It's light all the time. So that's what I want to begin with today. What is your experience of the dark? The dairy farm I grew up on, I think the yard light must have been on a timer because it was before they had light-sensitive lights. So even though we were a mile out of town in the country, there were always lights nearby. You could see the neighbors' lights. You could see the lights in town. Dark is what happened after Mom and Dad came upstairs in the old farmhouse, one of those 90-degree stairwells with big steps in an old farmhouse. The second floor was not heated. There was just a vent that you opened up in the winter to let the hot air rise. And there'd be 3 bedrooms. They'd say prayers with us boys, and then they would go down the stairs and shut off the lights. And it got really dark. Did you know when it's really dark and the windows are open, you can hear a coyote about 10 miles away? Barbara says she remembers talking to a person with a seeing eye dog, and she wondered what darkness means to a person who cannot see. One of the ladies at Chrysalis this last week, where we did communion together, she says she walks in the dark all the time. She's all but officially blind. By most estimates, 70% of our sense receptors are located in our eyes, and when they're working, they take over most of the duties of our other senses. On a night with no moon, it's not only possible to see the distant glow of the nearest town on the horizon. If you live in the prairie where there are not many trees, you can also see a single candle in a window many miles away. One of my memories of 4th of July is driving from Doniphan, where we'd visited my folks, back to North Bend, Nebraska, driving on Highway 30. And not only could you see the lights of every town about 5 miles before you got to it, one by one, fireworks were happening over the top of each town. They say astronauts up in space can see the rainforests burning in Brazil. They can see Paris, tell where the biggest cities are by the brightness of the light. And there is so much more visual information available to us than what we really want to see. Our brains have to take what goes into our eyes and make sense out of it, focus it into a clear picture we can understand. So what do? A lot of times we close our eyes to think, to concentrate. How many of you have done that? I had a kid once that when she was concentrating, she would close her eyes and stick her tongue out. That meant she was really thinking hard. So we close our eyes to think. I had a marvelous theology professor at the Divinity School at Duke University who lectured out front, in front of the podium, with his eyes closed. And we always teased him that he was reading his script off the back of his eyelids. But he was one of the most articulate professors I've ever had. So how about you? Do you close your eyes when you think? I took a poll this last week at several of our old folks' homes, asking them if they closed their eyes when they kissed. A couple of them said, "I can't remember." Do you close your eyes to listen better? Vision requires very little intimacies. So I'm going to try something this morning. I'm going to invite you, it's a dangerous thing, to close your eyes for the remainder of the sermon. Some of you are already very practiced at this. So close your eyes, because Barbara Brown Taylor describes this hot new thing out there in the world. There's a restaurant in Zurich called the Blindeke, opened by 4 blind people in 1990, and that idea has caught on. The German word translates as blind cow from the game of the blind man's bluff, and it was inspired by a Swiss pastor who routinely would blindfold his dinner guests who came to his house. He said they paid more attention to the food that way. They also listened to each other better. And the idea has caught on because there are blind restaurants where you completely dine in the dark in Paris and Montreal and Tel Aviv. There's a group in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Dallas and New York. The basic routine is that the first diners come in, they check their belongings, they place their orders at a prefix menu, and then a blind host guides them to their seats in a pitch black dining room where they hear all the usual sounds of a busy restaurant, but they can't see who's making the noise. In Zurich, waiters wear jingle bells on their shoes. I got one of those. I use it in my drumming circles. In the blind restaurant in Paris, every time a fork is dropped, everybody laughs. Because see, when you close your eyes, your other senses pick up. Patrons learn to pour their own wine by sticking their finger into the glass and pouring it until you feel the wine on your finger. The server teaches them to receive their dishes at the corner of their table and pass them to one another at the same point. And once their plates are in front of them, the server coaches them on where to find their food. Well, sir, the grilled salmon is at 12 o'clock. Ma'am, your roast potatoes are at 9. Snap peas are at 3. And a lot of diners have very positive reviews. They say the food tastes better because their smell and their taste is jacked up. Several suggested going to the restroom to wash your hands before being seated. And they also advise that you wear black because you are going to spill stuff all over you. Nick Cave, one of the people that ate there, said when it first came out, I took my shirt off. I mean, why not? Nobody could see me. Like he said, I considered taking my pants off too, but I worried I would lose them in the dark. The most surprising thing is how many people decide to keep their eyes closed during the whole meal. One lady received a long stem rose and a card written in Braille for her birthday. She said, the funny thing is the whole time I had my eyes closed because it was more comfortable than keeping them open, because when you opened your eyes, you could see nothing in the pitch darkness, and your mind would work to try and focus on something, and it felt unnatural. So Barbara talks about a man from France who had been blind since childhood, and he said with practice, he learned to attend so carefully to the world around him, he could confound his friends by describing things he could not see. He could tell different trees apart by the sounds of their shadows, he said. He could tell how tall or wide a wall was by leaning up against it. She said, why had I never paid attention to the sounds of trees before? Surely the leaves of an oak tree makes a different sound in the wind than needles of a pine, the same way they make different sounds under your feet. And speed is another problem, she says. Our eyes glide so quickly over things we don't properly attend to them. Fingers do not glide. To feel a table is much more intimate activity than seeing it. And Barbara said, I would have said that the one thing you could not tell without looking at it is what kind of wood a table is made of, but that was before I visited a violin maker who taught me about the different sounds of different woods. He says he only uses spruce at the front, maple at the back. He picks up a rough cut of each and raps them with his knuckles, and you could hear the difference. Every major spiritual tradition in the world says something significant about the importance of paying attention. Look at the birds of the air, Jesus said. Consider the lilies of the field. If you do not have time to pay attention to an ordinary table, how will you ever find time to pay attention to the Spirit of God that is within you? Because darkness is not only an outside thing, it's also an inside thing. How are we paying attention to the darkness that's in our souls right now? I've had calls this last month from former parishioners, a banker, a farmer. Both of them basically said the same thing to me. Tell me, Pastor Kelly, about the symptoms of depression. I think I'm dealing with that right now. I first became a volunteer mediator for the Supreme Court of the state of Nebraska back in the farm crisis times of the 80s. Some of you may also be old enough to remember that. And I had to wonder, are we going there again? That inner darkness. Barbara says if we can learn to be attentive every moment of our lives, we will discover a whole new world. Knowing, recognizing the darkness is the first step. And Barbara talks about how even the man in the moon is blind once a month. Once a month, his lights are put out for 3 whole nights while the whole world blocks the light of the sun. She says she always wondered why it always took 3 days for significant things to happen in the Bible. Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of a whale. Jesus spent 3 days in a tomb. Paul spent 3 days blind in Damascus. She says, now I know. From the very earliest times, people learned that's how long they had to wait in total darkness before the sliver of a new moon appeared in the sky. For 3 days every month, they practiced the resurrection of the moon's light. Theodore Rothke talks about how in a dark time, the eyes begin to see. Somebody else has said it's in the darkest sky that the stars shine the brightest. Right here in Nebraska, every summer, folks gather out south of Valentine for stargazing in one of the darkest places in America. A pastor friend of mine camps there with his family, and he says, you don't have to bring a telescope. There are tons of guys with huge telescopes that are there and happy to show you what they pulled up. The last chapter, Barbara Brown Taylor talks about caves. Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad all spent significant time in caves. So did St. Patrick, St. Francis. In caves, it's so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face, kind of dark. There's no easy way to tell time in the dark. Experienced cave dwellers teach that when you're exploring a cave, always look back every few minutes. Turn around, because nothing looks the same coming out as it did going in. You have to memorize the back side of every boulder, the shape of the hole you came through, see the reverse of every angle. See, Jesus was born in a cave, rose from the dead out of a cave. Whatever happened in the cave happened in the dark, in the silence. Maybe new life actually starts in the dark. We go to counselors when we want help getting out of the caves of our lives. We go to spiritual directors when we're ready to be led further into the darkness, because a lot of times the way out is the way in. It just looks different going out. And Barbara Brown Taylor reminds us that God is there in the dark as well as the light, on the outside as well as the inside. And sometimes it's okay to walk in the dark, because there is no place that God is not. Nudge that person next to you and tell them to wake up. The sermon's over. Amen.